All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of our Building a Culture of Operational Excellence webinar series. Last week, if you recall, we had Max Krug from Future State Engineering as our presenter. This week, I will be presenting along with Elizabeth Cipolla. We'll be introducing ourselves here in just a moment. So this week, we're going to be talking all about company culture. And then, of course, we have our third and final session next week, which is going to be looking at, we've talked through making changes operationally. We've talked about making changes from a culture standpoint. So now you're making all these changes, but how do you measure them? How do you track the progress? How do you track what's working, what's not working, and make decisions moving forward based on that? So that'll be next week for our third and final session. So with that, we can go ahead and talk through today's agenda. So we're going to be covering a lot of information today. Those of you who have attended webinar sessions with us before, you know that we love to pack them full of information, and today is no exception. So first, we're going to be talking about what is company culture. It's a term we hear all the time, but what does it actually mean, and why does it matter? We also want to help you understand how to get a feel for where your company culture is currently and help you figure out how you want it to develop and then what's it going to take to get there. We also have a resource that we're going to be talking through today, but also sharing with you in the follow-up email after today's session that's going to help you determine whether or not your organization is actually ready to undertake work on the culture. And we're going to talk about why that's important to figure that out before you start the work toward the end of the session. And then, of course, we'll cover some next steps so you know where to go from here. So with that, we're going to start with some introductions. Elizabeth.
Yes, so good morning, everybody. We're going to do very quick, I promise it'll only be 30 seconds so you can have a frame of reference in terms of an introduction to the organization with which we work. Decision Associates is based out of Erie, Pennsylvania. However, we service clients really all over the country, primarily focusing, at least as of recently, on the tri-state area of New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. But we definitely have done work and continue to do work all throughout other parts of the United States and look to most likely expand that even further in the near future. But our mission is to challenge in everything that we do, challenge our clients to be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be. And we're not for everybody. The only clients that we prefer to work with and that we choose to work with are those who really are progressively minded and demonstrate a desire to be the best in class in whatever their respective industries may be. You can see on the right-hand side of your screen all the services we offer. I myself am the practice leader here at Decision Associates, and Amanda is my right-hand person. Ironically, in the picture here, she's literally on my right, but she is my right-hand person helping to execute everything that we do. So that's a little bit of an introduction about our firm. Here's an introduction about us, and I'm going to actually switch things up and ask Amanda to introduce me, and I will introduce Amanda. So go for it, Amanda.
Sure. So Elizabeth is our talent and organizational performance practice. The top practice is what we like to refer to it as. She is our practice leader for Decision Associates, all of the services that we provide that are in the human resources space. So everything you saw on that previous slide, the executive recruitment, coaching, training and development, HR audits, all of those types of things fall under the top practice, which Elizabeth leads. She is married to Mike, who is a school administrator. They have 3 beautiful children, Nick, Tony, and Olivia, all teenagers. So we always send lots of blessings Elizabeth's way as she navigates life with 3 teenagers. What else about Elizabeth? She loves hair metal bands. That's a fact that I learned about her not all that long ago. And one of the things that I have really enjoyed about working with Elizabeth over these last 2.5 or so years that I've been on the team is her focus on learning about her team members' strengths and finding ways for them to really lean into those in the work that they do on a daily basis. She, of course, brings lots of fun and energy to our team. She's our team member who is really focused on innovation and finding new ways to serve our clients and better ways to serve our clients. And so she's actually one of the only members on our team who have that kind of behavioral background. And so we really look to her to provide that innovation and new ways of doing things. And so that's a really valued skill on our team. So that's a little about Elizabeth.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Amanda. And as you can see here, Amanda loved her family and her friends very, very much. Up on the top left of your screen, you can see the beautiful picture with her husband. And she and her husband, Andrew, love to travel. They just got back, in fact, from an Alaskan cruise, but they've traveled all over the world and have many other trips planned in the future. And one of their favorite things to do is to travel around and try different exquisite cuisine. So she has quite the palate, and she has definitely picked the right guy to marry because he actually used to be a professional food critic, in fact. So I love talking to her when it comes to the gourmet meals that they prepare and all the trips they take and the cuisine that they sample. She's much more adventurous than me when it comes to that. One thing I would say in regards to Amanda and how she fits into the culture that we have here at Decision Associates is she is the yin to my yang. So whereas I am kind of the idea person and the innovator and the person who takes a behavioral based approach to drive results and accountability, Amanda is the person who I affectionately refer to as a planda. So she is a logistics guru, all things project management, and she really executes and delivers and does a lot to make sure that she's the glue that holds everything together. And our team has grown, in fact, from the time that I joined about 5 years ago, from 6 employees up to 17. So we even have more people than you saw in the picture 2 slides ago. So that's a little bit about Amanda and a little bit about the 2 people with whom you'll be spending time together today. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what is company culture and why does it matter? So Amanda, do you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. So we're going to start with a little activity here. So we're going to show you some pictures here in a second. And what we'd love for you to do is take a look at those photos that are up on your screen. And in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself real quick, that's perfectly fine too. We want you to select a picture, or maybe there's a couple of pictures that you feel best represent your organization's culture as it stands today. So if you want to take a minute and drop that in the chat, we would love to hear your thoughts. So what photo or photos best represents your company's culture today?
I'm laughing, Amanda, because as everybody else is thinking of what to put, I'm thinking about what I would put for our culture because it's always continually evolving. So Samantha, you said the finger pointing. Yep. I like to call those the U guns. When those come out, that indicates a lack of accountability, right? A lack of accountability in culture. Excellent. Checks and checklists. Okay, Amy. Yes, checks and checklists. Lots of things to do, trying to get everything done. Person jumping. Sure, fun, but maybe a lack of focus. Excellent, Chris. I bet you lots of other people on today's session can relate to that as well. How many of us, right, find ourselves either trying to, what I like to call, boil the ocean when it comes to, checklists and trying to get a lot done? And how many of us can relate to that culture of finger pointing, AKA lack of accountability? And as Chris said, lack of focus. There's so much you want to do. And Alejandro, you mentioned why you missed that. No, not sure. Are you talking about the one in the front center where he's kind of looking out at the maze? That definitely might be something that a lot of us can relate to as well. Just trying to figure things out. The one in the laptop, Alejandro, yes. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Where do I go next? Culture can be very, very frustrating. That is for sure. Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, so this is an exercise we do a lot of times when we're talking about culture, because it's always interesting to hear what people say and how they interpret the pictures differently. And I think one of the things that we hear most frequently is, related to, well, we would love to have a culture of accountability, but we don't. Or we'd love to have a culture where, everybody feels that they can bring their whole selves to work, but we don't. And so I think the question we get most often is, how do we fix it? Where do we go from here? So we know where our culture stands today, but what are the steps we need to take? And how do we even figure out if our perception as an individual person is reflective of everybody's experience? And so we're going to talk through the importance of really getting a good understanding of what your culture actually is versus, we can all make guesses and estimations on what we think the culture of our organization is based on our own experiences. But really the best way to understand that is to include the opinions of everyone in the organization. So we're going to talk through that today. We're going to start with a little poll here. So we want to understand why does company culture matter? This is your opinion. We've got some choices there. You can select more than one. So we'd love for you to select why you believe company culture matters. So take a second. Got some answers coming in here. And we'll give you just a minute or so. I know there's lots of answers to choose from. And if you don't see the reason why you believe that company culture matters on this list, we'd love to have you drop it in the chat. All right, just another couple seconds. And then I'm going to end the poll and show everybody the results. Amanda Duncan demonstrates our values to our customers. Nice. All righty, I'm going to share the results here. So we have the top reason that company culture matters selection was it creates alignment across the organization. Great. Next is helps us retain employees. Awesome. And then it impacts our bottom line. Those are the top three. We do have a couple of answers in here that are answers that we hear frequently that maybe aren't necessarily why culture matters, but it is something that I think is maybe a little bit of a myth. So Elizabeth, would you like to talk about specifically the one that I love, which is it demonstrates how effective the HR function is?
Oh, yes, I would love to talk about that. So very often when it comes to organizational culture, let's keep in mind, first and foremost, that every single one of your organizations has a culture, right? Whether or not, and by the way, some of you are small enough organizations where you don't have a quote unquote HR function, right? You have maybe if you're in the nonprofit space, you have an executive director who's trying to wear the HR hat. If you're in the for-profit space, let's say manufacturing, when you're a small manufacturing organization, you have a plant manager who's trying to wear that hat, or even an office manager. But at the end of the day, and you might be from a large organization who has a VP of HR or an executive director of HR or an HR manager. Nonetheless, culture isn't something that just shows how effective the HR function is. In fact, organizational culture starts at the very, very top. We have worked with plenty of clients, and we're going to get to this a little bit later when it comes to determining if you're ready to work on your culture, who have HR leaders who are very, very skilled. They're very, very experienced. They're highly credentialed. But despite the HR leaders' best efforts to work on the culture, at the end of the day, because the top leaders of the organization aren't wholly committed and don't demonstrate the behaviors to show that they're ready to work on culture, they're not going to be successful. So it is a myth that it is the kind of pressure test to see how effective the HR function is. In fact, many organizations have lost amazing HR leaders because the senior most leaders just don't get it. And those top, highly qualified HR leaders leave and they go somewhere else to work for an organization who does. So I don't want you to think, oh, it's only something that HR owns. It really is something that has to be owned from the very top.
Very true. All
Mhm.
right, so we're going to talk now about why company culture matters.
So, yes, you see everything here in terms of great company culture and how it helps to make sure that you attract and retain the best. You create alignment, which was the top answer from the poll, and it engages and excites customers and team members, which all in all positively impacts company performance. But what I want to really make sure everyone understands to kind of dovetail on what Max talked about during the first session last week, at the end of the day, all the great things that everyone who's choosing to join us today, and for those of you who can't join us live, those of you who have chosen to register so that you can look at this after it's been recorded, all of you who have chosen to spend your time talking and learning about this today, obviously have a desire to make sure that you achieve stronger results than where you are currently, right? So what I want to make sure everybody understands is that managing your organizational culture so that it achieves the results that you desire, it's never mattered more, right? You have to know what to do, you have to know what to focus on, and you have to do it well. It's no longer an option, it's a necessity. It's great that people such as those of you who've joined us today really get it because you've chosen. You have a million other things you could be doing right now, but you've made a choice to spend time with us today. Your competition, who haven't made the choice to spend time with us today, that's good for you, but it's sad for them. Optimizing, I should say, your culture, kind of like what I said a few moments ago, it really must command every single bit of intentional effort as the work that you do to achieve performance across the organization in disciplines such as manufacturing, quality, continuous improvement, R&D, sales, the list goes on and on. And the most successful leaders, which I can venture to guess that the majority, if not all of you who've joined us today, might fall into that category because you've chosen to spend time thinking about this, pushing yourself when it comes to this topic. But the most successful leaders, the ones that see the results, they understand that changing the culture can mean changing the game. And that happens because you grow faster than your rivals. You beat a bad economy. You innovate when others are still trying to catch up and keep trying to do the same thing that haven't worked before, but they keep trying to push that square peg into the round hole. So managing your culture so that it achieves the results you're looking for, it really isn't an option. It is more than ever a core management competency that really is quite necessary in order to survive and thrive.
So we've got another poll. We want to understand what areas your organization struggles in, as it relates to culture. And for this one, we would like you to select from the options that we've listed here, one choice. So pick the one that you feel represents the area where you have the most struggle. Again, if you don't see an area that resonates with you, feel free to drop one in the chat. But we have some of the more common ones that we hear: trust, leadership, advancement and professional development, compensation and benefits, communication, work-life harmony, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We also have safety and quality, workplace relationships. And again, if you don't see an option here that resonates with you, please select or please drop something in the chat.
And everybody can choose one, you said, right, Amanda?
Yes.
Just to make sure. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we'd like you to pick one.
I feel like we should have a drum roll leading up to the big reveal. Can't wait to see what everyone picked.
Chris says accountability is our biggest struggle, I think.
Yeah.
Yep, we definitely hear that one a lot, Chris.
And Chris, I'm glad you said that because what we cover next week really helps to hone in. Both Max and myself and Amanda will be honing in on what to do about that.
All right. So for our results, we have with 4, communication was selected as the top, which I don't think is surprising to me or Elizabeth. We hear that quite frequently. And then we had a multi-way tie between trust, leadership, compensation and benefits, and workplace relationships. So thank you to everybody who filled that out. All right, so we've figured out, where your areas of struggle are. You've recognized that, nobody's culture is perfect. And so, as Elizabeth said, the fact that you're here today, you're taking an important first step. So what is company culture exactly? We hear, this phrase all the time, but what exactly does it mean? Company culture is really the way that your organization does two things: the way it lives out its mission and the way it delivers on its brand promises. So the messaging that you put out to both your internal community as well as your external community, that messaging, those promises that you make through your brand, that mission statement that you share, the vision, the values, how your organization actually lives out those things, that's a reflection of your company culture. And it's definitely something you can feel even as an outsider. And this is something that is really important for another one of the services that we offer, which is executive recruitment. Whenever we work with a client for the first time to recruit an executive level position, if we're not familiar with the company, the very first thing we'll do when we engage with them is go for a tour of their location. And the reason we do that is because when we're walking around, when we're looking at the physical spaces within the organization, when we're interacting with the employees and seeing how they interact with each other, you can feel the culture. You can really see it reflected in every facet of the business. And it's a great way for us to assess, is this the type of organization where we're comfortable recruiting someone to come and work? It really is reflected in truly every single facet and activity of your organization. And yes, Chanda, we still are fully remote. Trust is an issue, which may be the reason too. Trust is definitely a really big one that we hear a lot about. That feeling of, oh, I'm feeling micromanaged. Somebody's always looking over my shoulder or counting the hours that I'm at my desk versus not at my desk. And it just creates an environment that's not fun or engaging for anybody.
However, Shonda, I do just want to say one thing, because you might not be the only one here who either is fully remote or has a number of employees who are remote or even hybrid. And I can tell you, we can relate to that. Here, even at our organization, we work with many other clients who are in the same boat, but there are definitely some things that you can do to still build an extremely strong culture despite that. You just have to be intentional about it. So I just want to give a verbal prompt, Amanda and Max, to make sure that we allow just even a few minutes to share some best practices for Shonda and many others who are joining us for this series, some practical ideas and tips that I'd like to make sure that we share with you, so that you know how to be able to still deliver on improving your culture, so that you can see the results that you want to see, as per what Max is covering and as per what we talked about, creating a culture of accountability. There are definitely ways to do that. Is it more challenging? Not as much as you might think, but it definitely has to be approached in a bit of a different way.
Definitely.
All right. So let's talk a little bit now about continuing that conversation about company culture. And at the very top, you see culture is not what you do, it's how you do it. So the way I like to see it, or like to say it, is that your culture at the end of the day, it's the way people think and it's the way people act. Like I said a few moments ago, every single one of you, every single one of you, your culture exists. Do you really know what it is? Not what do you want it to be, but do you know what it is? And I can promise you, whatever it is, either you will manage your culture or it will manage you. Every single person who is with us today, including myself, including Amanda, right? Every single organization, we have a culture which is either working for us or against us. And every organization has subcultures within it that are working for or against us. So it really is what makes the difference between success and failure. All the amazing things that Max talked about last week, the reason why we decided to partner up and provide this blend of a series offering is because so many times, great people and who have worked closely with organizations like ours or like Max's or many, many others throughout the world. They have great intentions to go and improve systems, improve processes, improve their bottom line, but they fail. And why is it they fail? Not because the systems or the processes are broken, but because there's a culture that doesn't exist to really make it possible to achieve the results they want to achieve. So there really does truly need to be a blended approach. And that includes how decisions are being made, the people you hire, the people you promote, the people who exit the organization, who you recognize, what you recognize them for, how you celebrate together. At the end of the day, your culture is all about the relationships that exist. And too often, if we're entirely focused in one way or the other, meaning if we're entirely focused on only relationships, or if we're entirely focused only on results, we're missing a lot of the ingredients that together make up your culture, which once again, it's worth repeating. Culture is the way that people think and act. So one question I'd like to ask everybody for a moment, and feel free to unmute yourself and share it or drop your thoughts in the chat box. But if I were to ask you to describe your culture using the definition, the way people think and act, just give me 5 words that would describe your culture based entirely off of the way people think and act. How would you describe your culture? Building and communicating common sense. Excellent, Alejandro. That's not my job. Hear that quite a bit. Great, Samantha. So again, that lack of accountability, right? I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. So let's lack of urgency. Yes. Hey, we can wait, right? We can wait. We'll get to it later. That's one of my favorite things. We'll get to it later. We'll worry about it down the road. It's that kicking down the can down the road mentality, right? Friendly team waiting for instruction. Yes, a bunch of sheep waiting to be led, right? A lot of times that indicates a hierarchical culture where people aren't empowered to really behave like an owner, but instead wait to be led. And that, of course, dramatically impacts your ability to be innovative and nimble and flexible, which is very, very important. So let's talk a little bit more about why company culture matters. We all know it affects everything that you see here in the screen in front of you. And in fact, a Gallup poll from May 2023 reported that only 22% of employees surveyed felt connected to their organization's culture. Building a culture of accountability, it begins at the top of what I like to call the results pyramid. And the reason I like to, and we're going to actually show a graphic here. And in fact, I might, advance the slides a little bit further ahead and then come back to where we were going to go, because this is a really good time to talk about that results pyramid. So many of our organizations, we spend all this time developing goals, right? And what do we worry about? We worry about goals. Now, goals are very, very important. And why are they important? Because it sets the stage for what it is everyone can be working towards together in a unified manner. But culture and developing a culture of accountability where you can see the great results, such as what Max was talking about last week, that really starts with a foundation of a results focus. And the reason I say this versus a foundation of goals is because the term results implies a measurable. And a result, it really indicates whether you've achieved something or not. Whereas a goal is hopeful and it's not so absolute. You'll see in what we talk about next week in terms of how to go about really measuring, quantifying, and then delivering on developing a culture of accountability. It is based entirely on measurables. It's a very results focused way of doing it. So it matters. It matters because if you want to achieve results, if you want to be more than what you are today, tomorrow, if you want to be better, if you want to serve out your mission and help those that your organization is trying to help, more tomorrow than you are today, it truly all begins with culture.
So we wanted to share, this is from the Gallup study that Elizabeth just alluded to. They provide some additional statistics related to the culture questions that they asked. So of the small group of people who said that, I do feel connected to my organization's culture, it revealed that 3.7 they were 3.7 times as likely to be engaged at work, 5.2 times as likely to strongly agree that they'd recommend their organization as a great place to work, because remember, your current employees are some of your greatest assets when it comes to recruitment. They're the ones that are being asked the question, hey, what's it like to work there? And the response that they give can make or break someone's decision on whether or not they apply for a job with you. They're 68% less likely to feel burned out at work very often or always. And we see this a lot. In fact, we worked with an organization last year that had gone through a couple of really tough seasons that were very challenging and trying and came with a lot of stress and tension. And because they hadn't put as much emphasis into the people doing the work as they did the work itself, the team, when they were faced with a stressful situation, crumbled. They weren't supportive of each other. They all kind of felt like they were on an island. And it was a very tense environment that ultimately resulted, unfortunately, in some turnover for them. So
Pretty
understanding,
substantial turnover, in fact,
yes.
and
So
quality issues too, I'll just say.
definitely quality issues. So
Mhm.
understanding that the network that you create of, the culture and the team and the people supporting each other, that really makes a difference, especially during times of stress. The team bands together and they have that solid culture that unites them, and so they're able to make it through those tough times much, much easier. Also, 55% less likely to be watching for job opportunities or actively looking for another job. As we know, retaining our top talent is one of the things that we hear most frequently from our clients. That's a goal of theirs. We've got great people. We don't want to lose any of them. So how do we make sure that they stay engaged and that we keep this as, the top of their list of the places that they want to continue working? Work on culture can really drive that and make them feel that they are part of a team and part of a culture that they're happy to continue being part of.
I also want to point out one quick thing that I think too often goes unmentioned. Being intentional about the culture that you want to create to drive the results that every organization wants to drive isn't just about making everyone feel a sense of belonging, which is very, very important, and knowing how they fit into the different pieces of the puzzle, but just and equally, if not, well, I'll say equally as important, is it's going to keep the people that align with that culture, and it's going to deter those who don't. Not all turnover is what I call a regrettable loss. I definitely have found with the work that we do with organizations, and even in organizations throughout my 25-year career where I've been a leader, when you're very intentional, when you're very clear about what it is that needs to be achieved, how it needs to be achieved, and having a strengths based approach and being intentional about getting the organization to where it needs to go, the people who are in alignment and who have the potential are going to rise to the occasion and do that. And the relationships that are formed through the intentional work on your culture are going to make it so that when the times get tough, instead of those you guns, like, hey, it was you, it's not my job, it's not me, instead of those coming out, you band together and you find a way to make it work. But on the flip side of that coin, those who aren't able to play in the sandbox the way that everyone needs to play in the sandbox together to drive those results and to have those professional and mutually respectful relationships, they're either going to stick around or they're going to leave. And this is something with a particular organization that we're working with right now, someone who's been with the organization for many, many years. It's becoming pretty evident that this individual doesn't fit with the culture and the direction of where it's going. And in fact, it's impacting the results. So inevitably, they're self selecting out little by little. Oh, I'm no longer going to be a part of this piece of the job. I'm no longer going to be a part of that area of responsibility. And soon they're likely going to be exiting out of the organization. So I just want to point that out because I think too often it doesn't get mentioned. So there are lots of different elements of company culture, right? Everything you see here, Amanda, I want you to talk specifically about the one in the very top right, because work-life harmony is a different term. So often instead we hear something called work-life balance, but balance is really a myth, isn't it, Amanda? And do you want to
It
talk a
is.
little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was actually at a luncheon recently with a keynote speaker. She's the president and CEO of Athena International. Her name's Tracy Costa. And in her keynote speech, she talked about this concept of work-life balance that we hear so frequently as kind of this, aspirational big golden thing up in the sky that we all are striving toward. And she said, I really prefer to use the term work-life harmony because she said balance indicates equal. And she said so frequently that equality between our work and our life, it's just not feasible. It's not possible. So she encouraged striving for work-life harmony, which is really finding what works for you as far as the time you spend working, the time you spend living your life, and finding not necessarily an equal balance, but some kind of balance, if you will, with quotes, that works for you and that is giving you what you want as far as fulfillment out of both your personal life and your work life. So finding that harmony, not necessarily perfect balance, and that's going to change throughout your life too as you go through different phases of life. But the point being finding a place that works for you personally, not that is this, perfect balance between the two areas.
Also to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. I know, believe me, we work with hundreds of leaders through all different organizations every single year. Some people really lean into that area. Some people, they do an eye roll. I want to make sure everybody understands that I don't care where you're located. I don't care who works for your organization. Every single organization has a significant element of diversity. Don't just think of diversity in terms of the visual, ways that we can identify differences in people. But diversity is all about diversity in how people think, the life experiences that people bring to the table when they work for your organizations, the baggage that they carry that might make them or inevitably make them either, a little gun shy about certain things or certain ways of communicating or operating, and the trust that they have in leadership. It's very important. I'm going to say it again, the R word, relationship. It's very, very important that the relationships you establish are such that they take all of these elements into account, because at the end of the day, the most critical need that every human being working for your organization has is to feel a true sense of belonging. Amanda, I'd love for you, if you don't mind, to just share maybe 2 minutes, just so they have something tangible to relate to. If you could just share your insight for about 2 minutes about specific things that you have experienced that work well in terms of creating that sense of belonging, and maybe an example of something that hasn't worked so well and had the opposite impact.
Sure. So I think as far as and speaking from my own experience, things that work really well to developing those relationships and that sense of belonging is actually something I've experienced here at Decision Associates. And I'm not just saying that because Elizabeth is my supervisor and she's on the call right now.
No, she
This,
speaks truth. Trust me. She tells me when she doesn't like something,
yeah,
which is
very
great.
true. So, kind of what I alluded to at the beginning of the call when I introduced Elizabeth is this concept of really taking time to acknowledge and understand the strengths that exist on our team. So I've been in many positions in the past where it's kind of a square peg round hole situation. It's, well, I know this isn't really a skill set area of yours, but we're going to ask you to do this anyway, and you're going to do it, and we don't really care whether you like it or not or are good at it. So that creates a feeling of, stress and anxiety and, just a situation where I felt like I was constantly trying to climb this mountain and, I'd take a few steps and then I'd slide back down and then I'd take a few steps and slide back down. That's not a fun way to live your work life for anybody. And it was a constant situation of just being put in projects and on teams where I was just, from a behavioral and skill set standpoint, destined to fail. So, what I appreciate about the team that I'm on right now is that we genuinely take the time to understand each other's strengths and the types of work that we enjoy doing and the types of work that we don't enjoy doing. For example, we have a team member, Renee, who is phenomenal at making cold calls to candidates through our executive recruitment service. There's just something about Renee's personality that people are disarmed when this stranger calls them and asks them if they'd like to consider a new position. Um, she has a great conversational style, and she just has a way of, endearing herself to people and establishing a relationship very quickly. And that's a core behavior and a core ability that Renee possesses that I do not.
No.
So Renee is, thank you. So Renee is definitely the member of our team that we said, we need somebody to help us reach out to these passive job seekers and figure out if they're interested in pursuing a new opportunity. So Renee's the person on our team who does that. And we've seen a drastic increase. I think when I started, our response rate from candidates, passive job seekers, when we contacted them about a position was under 10%. Now it's, I think, 34%. So we've seen massive growth just in the last year and a half that Renee's been with us and started taking on this role. And that's because we took the time to understand her strengths, understand what she's good at and what she enjoys doing, and putting her in positions where she's going to get to do those things. It's the same thing with every single member of our team. So I think that taking that time, it's a lift on the front end for sure to take the time to understand, and it's ongoing conversations that need to happen, but the payoff in the end is so significant because you've got happier team members, more engaged team members, and people who are able to lean into the strengths that they naturally possess.
Which improves the competitive position, and every single conversation first and foremost starts at taking a look at the vision, what it is that we're trying to accomplish as a team, and the mission, how it is we get there. All right, so let's talk a little bit. What is your culture today? How do you want it to develop, and what is it going to take to get there? So we hear all the time about toxic culture. And how many of you would say, yeah, our culture has elements to it which are toxic? So I'd like to ask you, what comes to mind when you hear the word toxic, a toxic culture? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and share verbally your thoughts of what comes to mind when you hear toxic, or feel free to put it in the chat box. So what comes to mind when you hear the term toxic? Our culture is toxic. What do you think? So when you hear the term toxic, what comes to mind?
Max commented to me directly, finger pointing and blame.
Yes, finger pointing and blame. Undermining. Yes, undermining. Absolutely. So finger pointing and blame, undermining, everyone just being brought down, right? Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Austin. Lack of accountability, stress, lack of support, lack of accountability. That's another one, Shonda. Harassment. Yes, absolutely. Harassment happens as well. Absolutely. That bullying behavior. Interestingly enough, the majority, well, in fact, everything that was shared when it comes to a toxic culture, you're describing one of two things, either a behavior or a feeling. At the end of the day, those behaviors and those feelings are the results of an experience that people are going through. And they're confused, right? There's no disrespect. That's another behavior that we see. It's a result of confusion. And that confusion truly does stem from conflicting actions, conflicting messages throughout the organization. You can have an organization where the president is doing everything right in terms of communicating all the right things and doing their best to understand the current state of their culture. But if they're not having consistency and ensuring consistency in not just messages, but actions and behaviors, throughout all the different areas of their organization and the senior most leadership throughout, it's going to result in toxic behaviors. Why? Because there's not alignment, there's confusion. Whenever behaviors don't match words, that is where toxicity occurs, right? Because there's confusion. When behaviors don't match words, that is what creates toxicity in
One of
culture.
one of my favorite examples of this is organizations where you've got a leader who says, oh, we're not clock punchers, we're output based, we're not focused on how many hours you're spending at your desk or how long you're in the office or whatever the case may be. We're focused on the work that you get done. But then in the same breath, well, I noticed you weren't at your desk for very long today. I noticed you weren't here in the office, or I noticed that your online presence, sometimes you have to like move your mouse to keep it active if you're working remotely. Oh, I noticed that turned off today. Well, you're telling me that we're output based, so my work's getting done. I just may not be doing it in the same schedule or time frame that you're doing your work. But does that mean that I'm not doing a good job and not getting the things done that I need to get done? So when you've got that conflicting words with the conflicting actions, it causes a lot of confusion. And then you've got people feeling really frustrated and aggravated. It's like, well, I thought I was doing the right thing, but you're saying this, but doing that. And I'm just confused. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Excellent. Alejandro mentioned, hey, how do we go about relating what's optimal locally with what's optimal globally? So Alejandro, obviously you work within a global organization, and I would love to speak to that for a moment because, personally speaking, I know I was the VP of HR for a global organization and based specifically out of Wimborne, UK. And we had locations literally across just about every continent in the entire world. And when it comes to relating what's necessary and optimal from a local basis to what's necessary and optimal from a global basis, it's all about cascading it, right? So at the end of the day, what is most crucial, what is most critical that has to be accomplished, that has to be achieved? And really taking a look at, because there are different requirements, there are different cultural norms that take place based upon the different locations that you exist. So you don't want to get too much in the minutia of detail of micromanaging exactly how everything is executed in each of the cultures, but instead keep it focused upon the results that you're looking to achieve and keep it focused on the values that are non-negotiable. So the results are non-negotiable and the values are non-negotiable. And as long as you can then create a culture where you empower the respective leaders at each of your different locations to deliver, and there are very specific KPIs that we can talk about at the next session, to know if they're delivering on living out the values of the organization and focusing on achieving the results that need to be focused upon achieving. Everything else is going to come. But when we get too confused, too focused, too laser focused on the minutia of every little detail of the how, instead of empowering the leaders of those respective subcultures to make decisions that must be in alignment from a values-based perspective and must be in alignment, of course, in terms of achieving the results that need to be achieved, that's when you see the real magic happen. All right. So, Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about the culture that exists today?
Definitely. So one of the questions we get a lot about, related to culture is, well, what is my culture today? I have my perception of the culture, but that's not necessarily reflective of everybody in the organization. So some signs that can indicate trouble in the realm of culture is you may start to see things like your identity as a company is eroding in the marketplace. Maybe your brand doesn't carry the weight that it used to, or you're finding that there are, more and more people who don't really understand your organization or what it does or the purpose that you serve. You may have a declining or stagnating customer base. Maybe you're seeing customers exit because they say, you know what, we just don't feel this is the right relationship for us anymore. Or you've got clients, but you don't hear from them on a regular basis. They're just kind of letting that relationship fall to the wayside. Could be an inability to attract and retain talent. This is probably the one we hear most frequently. We've got these open positions and they've been open for months and months and we just can't fill them. Well, do you understand what your culture is and how that's being communicated out in, the community among potential applicants? Difficulty driving organic growth. Well, it just seems like no matter what we do, we can't grow. We're just, maintaining this plateau or we're starting to decline. And any leadership initiatives, those may be stalling out. So you're in a situation where we've got, we've got this program that we're going to launch and it's going to be great and we're all excited. And then you launch it and it doesn't really go anywhere. There's no clarity on the direction or clarity on the purpose. And it just sort of stops.
Let me speak to that really quickly because I can't tell you, and I guarantee Max, if you want to chime in either by unmuting yourself or throwing something in the chat for everyone to see, I guarantee you've seen this as well. So often, the biggest reason why leadership initiatives stall out, and this is why it's a huge indicator to us that it's a culture in trouble, is because there's too much focus on the event, meaning, oh, I sent people to this course, therefore, voila, everything's going to be improved. And there's not a realistic expectation in terms of what to measure to see if it's successful. And guess what, folks? The only way that improvement can happen is by it occurring incrementally. And also, the vast majority of development and improvement occurs from growth and learning that comes from failures, right? So let's say, for example, leadership initiatives stall out. Well, that's oftentimes a big clue to us that the type of culture that exists is a culture where it's a check the box mentality. It's a culture where, there's not a true investment of making sure that the people in leadership roles have, the support they need to not only succeed through successes, but learn and evolve and continuously improve through failures. That's a huge clue that exists. So being practical and realistic about your leadership initiatives and understanding it is never a one and done situation. It has to be an iterative process where failure is inevitably a part of that because that's where the growth happens. And what Max shared, leadership focuses on the what and not the why. Very well said. Very well said, Max. So think a little bit about the other indicators that you've seen. How do you know your culture is in trouble? And I would imagine that many of the answers might be some of what you put in the chat box earlier. It's the behaviors that you see, and it is the way people feel, right? So, Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit more about what the culture is today?
Sure. Going back to that Gallup survey that we referenced earlier, they also talked to senior leaders within those organizations that they surveyed. And it revealed that senior leaders are twice as likely as individual contributors and managers to feel connected to their culture, which, to Elizabeth's point earlier, culture comes from the top. So that's not necessarily surprising because, they're the ones that are setting the tone and modeling the behaviors that are part of the culture for everyone else. So, okay, on one hand, that's a good thing. But on the other side, that divide does reflect a disconnect in how leaders and other team members experience the work environment. And we actually have a culture assessment service that we offer. And one of the things that is often revealed through that initial culture survey is a difference, and sometimes a really significant difference, between the perception of the leadership team and the rest of the employees related to the culture. So it's a situation where, take trust, for example. I'm trusted to do the job that I was hired to do. And the leadership team says, yeah, I feel great about that. I think I'm really trusted to do that. And then you've got a much lower score from the employees, and they say, no, I'm constantly feeling like I'm micromanaged. There's always somebody looking over my shoulder. They're always checking in. And I just feel like they don't trust me to do the job that I was hired to do. So that disconnect can really be a significant source of challenge for organizations if they don't put conscious effort and work on bridging that gap between the leadership team and the rest of the employees to make sure that those really positive culture elements are trickling down through the entire organization.
Thank you, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your culture today? The biggest thing that I want to make sure everyone understands is never to assume. 100% of the time, and literally, I mean 100% of the time, whether it's clients with whom we work or whether it's ourselves, because by the way, we practice what we preach when it comes to this. When we do the discovery work to understand this current state of the organization's culture, there are things that we discover that we never knew, right? And there's a concept called Johari's window. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but Johari's window really talks about the discovery process that you need to go through to truly understand what your culture is. And if you can imagine 4 panes on a window, one of those panes is what you know to be true and what others know to be true. So I'll just give an example from, a relatable perspective. We offer flexibility for scheduling. So that is something that we know to be true as leaders, and that's something the employees know to be true. So that's one pane of the window. The other pane is what we know to be true, but others don't. So I'll give an example. As a leader of this organization, what I know to be true are some plans that we have coming down the road of areas that we're going to work on to improve. But it hasn't yet been communicated to the employees, so they don't know. The next pane of the employee are things that our employees know to be true, but we don't. Perfect example is how they feel working here, the experience that they have working here. They know that, but we don't know that always, right? As leaders. And the last pane of that window in this Johari's window concept are the things that are yet to be discovered, what neither you nor your employees know to be true. So it's very, very important through the discovery process of assessing your culture in an absolute manner, either through agreeing or disagreeing to multiple statements, to understand the experiences that your employees are going through, understanding the impact of those experiences, and then connecting the dots about the results that you're seeing or not seeing. And it's very, very important to ask your employees for their feedback, but it's also very, very important to engage a third party to assist you in getting your employees' opinions. And there are many of you on this call and in this Zoom today, or for those of you who will be listening later to the recording, who might say, well, I can just Google it, or, I've administered culture surveys before. It is massively critical to engage a third party to assist you in getting an accurate pulse of your culture. Even me, right? Again, I've committed my career to doing this. In order for us to get an accurate picture of our culture, I engaged somebody from the outside to help us. Amanda, do you want to speak for just a moment as to why that's so important? Because this is a huge fail that we see many organizations experience. So I want to make sure you understand.
Yeah, we just worked with an organization even just within the last year or two on a culture assessment process, and they revealed to us when we started that we've done these in-house before, and the response rate really hasn't been very good, so we don't expect a great response from this survey. And one of the reasons why is because if you're the organization that these employees work for and you are the one administering the survey, how likely is it that they will feel comfortable being upfront and honest with their answers? A lot of times there's that fear that, oh, somebody's going to be able to attribute my answers back to me. They're going to figure out that I was the one who said these things, that I'm not happy, and they're going to there are going to be repercussions for that. So engaging a third party really creates that barrier of security, that feeling of security for your employees. So they're in a position where they can feel comfortable being completely honest in giving their feedback and knowing that their responses are not going to be able to be tied back to them as an individual.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, it's nothing to do with your skill set or your pure intentions, but we believe so strongly in it, like I said, that we even engaged with a third party to assist us. So it's has nothing to do with who you are or how adept you are, but it's very, very important. So once you have the feedback, you need to then understand the gaps between your current state and where it is you'd like to be. And then from there, that's where you develop your cultural development team. And based upon not goals, but based upon data, right? Based upon results, you develop goals to know exactly what it is you need to work on. And from there, you develop KPIs so you can measure progress. I promise you, you've heard me say it before, and I will say it again. What doesn't get measured won't get done. What doesn't get measured won't get done. And that is at the foundation of the work that Mac does and what it is he talked with you about last week and the approach that we're talking with you about right now as it pertains to culture. There are 3 A's that I like to say of accountability. Number 1, without ownership of each of the individual pieces and the work overall, progress will not happen. It'll be nothing more than an idea, right? Oh, yeah, we know we need to work on that. Well, it'll be that can being kicked down the road, like what someone in the chat box said a little bit earlier this morning. So there has to be ownership of the individual pieces. And that ownership can't be, oh, let HR deal with it. I am telling you, it is never, ever going to be successful if there isn't that demonstrative commitment of the people at the very, very top. If they are too busy, and again, this will be captured in the readiness checklist that Amanda sends out, and you can see that. You have to have a frank look in the mirror if you are a member of that most senior level leadership, or if you're not the member of that senior most level leadership, let's say you are an HR executive who has responsibility of facilitating cultural enhancements. You have to ask these tough questions to your senior most leadership, because I promise you, without making sure that they're ready, which includes ownership of the work overall and their piece in the individual elements of it, there won't be progress. You will be set up to fail as an organization every single time. In addition to that, there has to be alignment. And the only way to ensure alignment is a regular cadence of pulse surveys and consistent check-ins in a quantifiable, measurable way in accordance with whatever KPIs are established based upon that initial survey. You cannot become complacent when it comes to that. Why? Because what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. And then, of course, the assessment. You have to understand what it is that success looks like and the metrics that you're using to track that progress. Once again, next week when we're together, you're going to see exactly what we mean for that. But let me just show you this picture right here, this graphic of the culture pyramid. Your culture, remember we said early on in today's webinar session, your culture is made up of experiences and beliefs. If you don't understand the experiences and if you don't understand the beliefs that the people in your organization are going through, then any action that you have is going to be nothing more than throwing spaghetti on the wall, and you will not see the results that you are trying to achieve. I can promise you, I can guarantee you 100% of the time this is the case. I'm going to say it again. You have to understand the starting point of the experiences your employees are going through and your leadership team and all respondent groups, right? For understanding from a survey perspective, your existing culture, and you have to understand their beliefs. It's massively critical. So, Amanda, they're probably sick of hearing about me or hearing my voice. Do you want to talk a little bit about the culture of readiness checklist?
Sure. So as we've mentioned throughout today's session, there are plenty of clients that we've worked with over the years who say that they're ready to take on culture work. Yep, we know it's really important. We've got to do it. We're ready. Let's go. Let's go for it. So we start working with them, and then all of a sudden we start to see things fall apart. We see red flags, and we see that the culture work is not making the progress that it should be making. And a lot of times that ties back to some very simple concepts that, the organization needs to make sure that they've addressed these areas before they begin. So what we're going to provide to you as a follow-up from today's session is a document that outlines two lists. One, if you check all the boxes on this list, then your CEO, your president, your senior most leadership, they're all ready to work on the organization's culture. Because remember, culture is a top-down thing. So making sure that they're all 100% on board, engaged, involved, and ready to hit the ground running, super, super important. The other thing that's on that document is a list of red flags. So if you're going through and you're seeing, oh, yep, someone, it's an organization that is really struggling with a top-down hierarchical cultured organization. Somebody in our team is demonstrating a pattern of continually moving the goalposts, so the outcome isn't clear, or favors them personally in some way. They don't have the greater team at the betterment of the team at heart. They have difficulty holding others accountable. These are all red flags that are going to say, well, pump the brakes, hold on, before you start working on your culture, you've got to get these other areas shored up before any of this culture work is going to be positioned to be successful, because
And
you
I can,
really can do irreparable damage to
oh,
your culture if you start doing the work before you're ready.
you will do irreparable damage. Not you
Yep.
can, you will
Yep.
definitely. So here are the next steps, right? So the next steps are going to be, take a look at the culture work readiness checklist that we will be sending you out. And, first and foremost, identify if your organization is even ready to work on their culture. I'm not saying they don't need to, because every organization needs to, but are they ready? So you have to understand that. Once you understand that, then you can get to the point where you work on assessing your current state. And again, I cannot emphasize enough. We even practice what we preach for this and use somebody other than ourselves, even though we clearly have the skill set. You need to involve a third party to assess your current state. And then from there, take a look at the results and understand what that gap is between your ideal state and the actual culture that exists. From there, you don't want to make it too broad in terms of trying to boil the ocean and fix all the things, but you want to really identify those 5 or so areas of initial focus that are your lowest hanging fruit to have the biggest impact in as many areas as possible, as revealed through the gaps that exist.
And
And
one
then you
thing,
want
Elizabeth, I'll just quickly jump in to
yeah,
add, when it
yeah.
comes to identifying those 5 to 7 focus areas, those 5 to 7 focus areas don't all have to be areas where things aren't going well. You
Mhm.
could dedicate time and effort to an area where things are going well to try to dig deeper and understand why that's the case, to make sure that that stays on track for the future. Because a lot of times, as we all know, when you work on other areas, sometimes the areas that were going really well start to fall apart a little bit. So
Mhm.
if you decide, we're going to focus on these 4 areas that our culture survey revealed aren't going very well, we're going to focus our energy on these 2 areas where things are going well, so we can understand why and make sure that that doesn't fall apart as we continue to work on other things.
Absolutely. I thank you for saying that. That's a good ad. Thank you very much. Having project teams, ensuring accountability, and making sure you are measuring the right things to drive improvement and drive success. Those KPIs, that's very important. And then not just making sure of it, but actually having those pulse check-ins to understand the progress you're making or not. Too often, in fact, most often, organizations will do it once a year and they'll feel really good about that. But it's a day late and a dollar short if you're not, at incremental steps along the way, understanding if you're making progress as you intend to. If you wait a whole year only to find out, oh, we are missing the mark, look how much that puts you backwards, right? So that puts us right about at the end point. It's 10:14. We've enjoyed the time that we have spent with you today. Amanda, is there anything else you want to say as we close out?
One quick note. So obviously, as you did last week, you will be getting a follow-up email this week with all sorts of great resources and some key takeaways. Elizabeth, if you could, yep, perfect. So we would encourage you to follow us and, LinkedIn, Facebook, our website there. Also, if you scan the QR code, there's a link to sign up for our e-newsletter. We send that out quarterly. It's called Decision Point. Lots of great content there. So, and I saw we have a question in the chat about how often we suggest doing the pulse surveys. Your team gets tired of them. So we recommend doing those quarterly. You have your initial big survey, and then that for the way that we approach the culture assessment process, the initial survey is long, typically 100 questions or so, with a mixture of agree or disagree response, and then some open-ended questions as well. And then the pulse surveys are much, much shorter, typically 10 to 15 questions at the most. Again, a mixture of agree, disagree, and open-ended questions, but they are focused on the areas that you settled on as a culture development team to work on, that were revealed in the first survey. You said, okay, these are our 5 to 7 initiatives we're going to work on. Your pulse survey questions are built around those initiatives, and that goes out quarterly.
And one thing just to say, it'll address both what Chandra said as well as what Chris just mentioned. So it's not just doing the surveys, the pulse surveys are the main one. There's so much in the way that you communicate it, the way that you roll it out, the way that you follow up afterwards, and the results that you very transparently, good, bad, and ugly, share with everybody so that they can see how the areas that are being focused upon and how their feedback is directly tied to to the improvements that are being made or the steps backwards that are being taken, and you as a leadership team are standing up there and saying, okay, we tried this, it didn't work, here's what we're going to do to try to go at it again. We're going to involve the employees. So there's so many elements that go into it. It really is a science to make sure that you don't get fatigue from your employees, because they're going to realize, hey, something's being done with the information. It's being communicated in a digestible way that makes sense to us in the most simplistic manner. And for small teams, this works for teams as small as 10 people. If we're talking 2 people, obviously it's pretty obvious, but certainly, Chris, if you want to talk to us offline, feel free to connect with us and we'd be happy to have a conversation. But this is something that works for teams as small as 6 people and for teams as large as 50,000 people, right? So everything in between. But thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate the time that you spent with us today. And to continue the conversation, please feel free to follow us. All the information is there. Or if you'd like to reach out to us directly, here is our phone number, here is our email address, and we're always happy to have a conversation. If you can't tell, we're very passionate about this. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.